Hello, I'm author and publisher Mark David Welsh, and today I'm here on Cult Cinema Book Review to talk about Santo, the Wrestler with the Silver Mask, a guide to all his films by Felix Hahlbrock Ponce. Now, for all you cult cinema freaks not familiar with El Santo, here's a brief catch-up. El Santo was a Mexican wrestler who never removed his silver mask inside or outside the ring. Lucha Libre, as wrestling is known in Mexico, is a cultural phenomenon, with the fighters accorded the same status as rock stars or famous actors. And El Santo is the most iconic figure of them all. And I don't use that word lightly. He won countless titles and championships over a career that spanned almost half a century, and there are statues of the man in several Mexican towns and cities. He became, quote, a folk hero and a symbol of justice for the common man, end quote. And he also made films, over 50 of them, during which he fought crime kingpins, foreign agents, mad scientists, werewolves, vampires, mummies and aliens. On one occasion he even went to Atlantis. On another he invented a time machine and tangled with Dracula. The man certainly got around. So a book about his films is long overdue. But before I discuss it with you, let's make it clear what this book isn't. It's not an examination of wrestling's place in Mexican culture or an attempt to explain it, which would be of interest to me. As someone who grew up in the UK back in the 1970s, we only had 3 television channels, one of which showed wrestling every Saturday afternoon. And although it did have a following, it was regarded as a bit of a joke by the majority of the watching public, and it vanished from our screens in the 1980s. So I'd be interested in knowing just how and why the sport has taken such a hold on the Mexican people. But as I said, this book is not about that. Nor is it a biography of the great man himself. Nor does it cover other wrestling movies or Mexican horror and science fiction cinema in general, which I only mention because I really want a book that does. Mexican cinema had a wonderful anything goes sensibility in the 1950s, the 60s and the 70s, and I would love to get my hands on a comprehensive guide to it, and I do have something on order that may just fit that bill. But to return to the book in question, it has an author who is part German and part Spanish, and it's pretty obviously a self-published work. And that's no criticism. My own writing is self-published after all. However, it does mean, to some extent at least, I know what you can and can't do with self-publishing, particularly through the Amazon platform. And that brings us to the cover of the book. Now, this is obviously extremely basic. Now, I appreciate the difficulties with designing and publishing a book cover, at least through Amazon. It can take multiple attempts to satisfy their technical requirements, as I know from bitter experience. So I can understand why this author may have chosen a far simpler approach. I'm also aware that there are formatting challenges when including photographs, although as a novelist, I've thankfully never had to do that. I'm also not too clear about the copyright law regarding the use of photographs. So a combination of all those things may have dictated why there are none in the book or on the cover. But given all that, couldn't the author have at least ensured that the lettering of the title didn't overlap the small illustration that he did use? As the title suggests, this is a guide to El Santo's movies, nothing else. So what we get is an entry for each one, complete with basic credits such as director, writers, music composer and the main cast. There's also a story synopsis, which avoids spoilers, and commentary from the author, which contains some brief production information. Now, it does not take too long to realise that this is a collection of blog posts compiled into a book. And a lot of credit goes to the author for managing to see all these films. They are not that easy to find. especially with subtitles, but as the author is part Spanish, that probably wasn't an issue for him. And he certainly has a very extensive knowledge of Mexican cinema that is really quite impressive. But as the films are placed in chronological order in the book, that means that certain information does get repeated rather quickly from entry to entry, because the posts were not originally written to be read one after the other. Also, the entries differ in length quite noticeably. This may be because the shorter ones were written earlier. I know with my blog, over time the posts have generally become longer and more in-depth as my knowledge and confidence has increased. But it might have been an idea in this case to expand those shorter entries and to do a bit of a clean-up of the text in general. In other words, to provide a clearer narrative of the development of the series as it progresses from film to film. When it comes to the production information available, it is not extensive. However, it is necessary to bear in mind the difficulties that the author would have had in researching these films. They were made in a different country, the last one in the series almost 40 years ago. In-depth information is really only going to be available to someone who can track down the surviving filmmakers, look at the original reviews, publicity materials, archived interviews, etc., etc. And as I've already said, that's not an easy task to accomplish for someone living on another continent. Finally, I have to mention the English translation. Now, I hate people who correct my English when I use the wrong word in conversation, especially if my meaning is perfectly clear. I think it's arrogant and extremely annoying. So it was with great reluctance that I bring this up here, especially as the author has translated the text from the German himself, something I freely admit that I could never do. I only speak my native tongue. And his English is very good. On all but a couple of occasions, it's clear what he means. But to someone who has English as their first language, his word selection is very odd at times, and sentences do feel clumsy and occasionally awkward. To give some brief examples, quote, "He too is in grave danger because he too is descended from that high priest." End quote. Another quote, "The international intrigues and conflicts provoked by the counterfeiting gang have nothing to envy the 007 franchise." End quote. We know what the author means, but the English does need tidying up a little so that the prose flows better. As it is, you do sometimes have to go back and reread a little here and there to catch his meaning. On the other hand, this issue does give us a wonderful sentence. Quote, "Scientists don't give the slightest importance to the old man's nuts." End quote. Again, in context, we know exactly what the author means, but that's not really the best way to express it. So, to sum up, this is a decent, quick reference guide to the films of El Santo, which is very, very reasonably priced, and should appeal to fans of the Silver Masked Man. Personally, I want something more in depth, and as I've already indicated, I do have a volume ordered which is on its way. However, it's worth mentioning that that book was considerably more expensive than this one. Well, that's it for this edition of the Cult Cinema Book Review. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe if you've enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next week. And in the meantime, don't be a stranger.